Red-eyed Sasquatch. So I grew up out in the countryside of northern Indiana. This encounter happened when I was in 7th grade. We had a trash pile where we burned our garbage and my mom had me take a bag out at like 10 p.m. I grew up in the woods around our house and was not afraid of the dark, so I didn't have any reason to be hallucinating or seeing shapes in the dark, as kids do. I had never been afraid of the dark until this point in time. I thought about going inside to grab my phone and take a video. Then I thought about the videos of eyeshine out there and what they show. I think it would have shown up bright and clear, if they'd stuck around, but it's basically just going to show one, sometimes two yellow-white circles of light on a black backdrop. There's no way these subtle movements and slight swaying I observed would translate. What if their being there is contingent on my reluctance to reach for a camera? If your goal is to prove, I think you've got some good ideas for sure, but you've also done a great job laying out some of the daunting challenges of photographing them. I guess for me, if there's a choice to be made between proving their existence and getting to know them, I prefer the latter. The scenario I was in felt precious. It's not something I care to interrupt for a photo. I took the bag out and walked the short distance down the road to our trash pile. I was about to throw our garbage on top before I saw something standing about a car's length from the pile. Whatever this thing was, it was towering over me, and I was tall for someone around my age, being 13. This thing loomed over me. It had to have been over 10 feet tall. We just stared at each other for a long minute, and that is when I noticed that it had her midnight fur and bright red, almost glowing in the dark eyes. I was frozen. Then it just turned and stomped back into the woods. It was very fast, and to me, the weight of this thing was making the floor of the woods vibrate. I screamed and dropped the bag in the road and ran as fast as I could back to the house. My mother saw that I was acting like I was in shock and I could hardly breathe, and my mom was tuned out most of the time, being too depressed to even notice her children. My state of mind obviously disturbed her enough that she came to check on me. I told her what happened and she let me stay home from school the rest of the week. Fast forward about 5 years later. I started living with my aunt because my situation with my depressed mother got so bad that I had to move. At this point in time, my mom was too depressed and addicted to all sorts of things. One night my aunt had some friends of the family over and I heard a conversation that piqued my interest. My aunt was telling our family friend about seeing a pair of red glowing eyes staring in at her from a 10-foot-high window in her trailer. One of those weird small ones that are toward the top in the bathroom. The same place that I saw that tall man-beast thing. I told her what happened to me and her jaw dropped. This was probably the most satisfying thing that happened to me. Hearing it from another person made my experience feel authentic and made me think that I wasn't crazy anymore. Reply. Well, accounts of Bigfoot with red glowing eyes is not unheard of. It could possibly be the effect of the tapetum lucidum, i.e. eyeshine. Alligators, owls and rabbits have red eyeshine. Interesting though is that most primates lack this feature. Sorry to hear about you growing up with a depressed parent. That must not have been fun. Hopefully she got better at some point. Reply. I'm from Elkhart. When I read your title, I immediately thought of the Sister Dewey Lake monster up in Dowagiac, MI. The stories often describe seeing red eyes. If you haven't already, check out bfro.net and you can search the counties near you to see if anyone else has reported an encounter. The reports are generally very detailed and there's quite a few documented cases in the counties straddling the Indiana-Michigan border. Reply. I've seen the red eyes. Up in the Marble Mountain wilderness of Northern California. It was at night, in the dark, in a meadow when I stepped out of a cabin to use the latrine. I assumed the eyes belonged to typical nocturnal fauna. Although my family camped every summer, I'd never before been to a place as remote as this. I'm a city dweller and grew up in the suburbs. So I too was not in fear or trepidation when I saw 3 sets of red eyes in the darkness approximately 60 feet away. But then the hairs on my neck stood up and I refused to go any further down the trail to the latrine. I decided to relieve myself upon a tree. That's when the loudest, most frightening primordial shrill, which crescendoed into a guttural roar, bellowed at me from the direction of the eyes, penetrating my very core, and I retreated to the cabin and turning white as a ghost in the process. I begged my uncle to scan the surrounding area with a brighter flashlight and he refused. A long minute passed before he relented, and upon doing so we saw no sign of the eyes, yet in the distance we heard one more audible of that scream. Later, very recently actually, I found a couple of websites, Bigfoot Encounters and BFRO. Each website has hundreds of eyewitness reports of seeing these creatures, including very close-range encounters. Many of these reports describe the red eyes and that deathly roar. Reply. When I was like 6 or 7 years old, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes with a large, dark, ape-like outline of a body. It woke me up when I was sleeping in the middle of the night. Its red eyes were only few inches from my face. And I'm sure I wasn't dreaming. I was so terrified, I pulled up my blanket, covered my head with it and hoped it would go away, but it didn't, until I fell asleep again and it was gone when I woke up in the morning. But it wasn't as tall as what you witnessed. People told me that this thing has growing phases just like us. Reply. Took a long weekend at a cabin not too far from Warren Dunes, heard knocks in the woods at the dunes, and I tried my hardest to invite them to visit the cabin at night. On the second night, they obliged, and we spent several long sessions just staring at each other like this. They gradually moved around the back of the property between sessions when I'd go inside, and when I came back out, they were in a different area of the woods and much closer. I'd guess the bright one standing in the middle was maybe 50 feet away, but really hard to gauge honestly. I felt incredibly honored. This was my longest and best encounter to date. It also firmly settled the "eye shine versus eye glow" debate for me. They glow. I have no clue how. I asked them several times. They didn't answer. Can't say I'm surprised. Really tough to judge heights and distances in such darkness. Only the bright one in the middle was standing. The two to my left were likely prone or crouching or lying behind some cover. The one to my right was also likely crouching. I'd guess the one standing could have been anywhere between 6 and 8 feet off the ground. Unfortunately, I didn't really have any point of reference for comparison in the daylight the next day. Edit. Forgot to answer your second question. None during these sits. I even asked if they'd make a sound at some point. They did not oblige that request. However, after I'd gone inside and to bed, my girlfriend went to the bathroom and saw the bright one through the bathroom window. She only told me this the next day. Guess it understandably kind of freaked her out. That means he would have moved further around the auxiliary buildings and was likely behind the shed across the driveway, probably 25 to 30 feet from the window. At that point, there was a wood slap sound, and I did hear that from bed too. Reply. Depending on how long ago this was, you may have seen some things. You could have just seen a bear and years later added the red eyes. Tall for your age doesn't help with the height difference. 12 or 13 and being tall for your age could mean you're anywhere from 5, 6 to 6, which still most kids that age can't see real difference in height. The creature could have only been 7 foot to 7.5 feet tall, but to you it looked 9 foot tall. I'm 5, 8 and if I were to see a 6, 9 to 7, 2 guy I'd think you were 8 feet tall. I'm a skeptic because I've never seen one, which is what these types of stories need. You very well could have seen Sasquatch and your story doesn't add unnecessary details like most sightings. I believe you saw something huge, but Bigfoot is a stretch. If this only happened a few years ago, then that's different, but our memory fades in time, so if this encounter happened 10 plus years ago, then a lot of key details are missing. You also would have added a lot of stuff in that weren't there. What do you think, team?